Hey, good afternoon. It is Saturday. It is the Saturday before the 11th Sunday of Pentecost. This is a devotional that we've been doing now probably for over a year in video form, but longer than, and that probably one of the longest running features of my blog. We've been looking at a devotional from the Revised Common Lectionary since really Advent of 2006. So this is a devotional for this week. It is the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, proper 14, meaning the parts of ordinary time. And we're continuing. We are in year B of the lectionary cycle, and we find ourselves today in John's Gospel, chapter 6, looking at something that's very similar to last week, still looking at this idea that Jesus is the bread of life. And so, again, we find ourselves in John's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 35, and then 41 through 51. Jesus is speaking to the crowd, and Jesus replied, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again." So Jesus is the bread of life and Jesus is talking about spiritual hunger here. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So not only Jesus saying that, yes, I will satisfy you spiritually, I will satisfy your spiritual hunger, but I will satisfy your spiritual thirst as well. And so And then that's just that one verse. John 6:35 talks about Jesus being the bread of life, that he will satisfy the spiritually hungry, he will satisfy the spiritually thirsty, and we see that also over in Matthew. It talks about blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be satisfied. And so this idea of hungering and thirsting after the things of Christ is what Jesus is getting out. That's the bread of life. So down a couple verses, John starts recording. He says, verse 41, "Then the people began to murmur in disagreement because he had said," and here's what Jesus said, "I am the bread that came from heaven." They said, "I am the bread that came from heaven." And they said, "Isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph? We know his father and mother, and how can he say that I came from heaven?" So Jesus is in many ways equating himself with the bread that came from heaven, the manna. He's saying that he came from the Father, and they're saying, but you were born of a human. You were born of a human mother. You were born of a human father. So how can you say that you came from heaven? Which is interesting when you think about back to John 1:14. John 1:14 said that, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, full of grace and truth." And so this Jesus, they're just not getting the idea that what's being set up here. And he says, but Jesus replied in verse 43, "Stop complaining about what I said, for no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them to me, and at the last day I will raise them up. As is written in the scriptures, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who listens to the Father and learns from him," listen to that, "anyone who listens to the Father and learns from him comes to me. Not that anyone has ever seen the Father, only I," meaning Jesus, "who was sent from God, have seen him." So here's this, Jesus is really setting up the fact that he has come from the Father, that he is from the Father, and he is setting up this idea that he is the bread of life. He is sent from heaven. He is like the manna that God sent to the Israelites. "I tell you the truth. Anyone who believes has eternal life. Yes, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness." And so here's where he's really cutting getting down to brass tacks here. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, but they all died. Anyone who eats from the bread of heaven, again being Jesus, the bread of heaven, the bread of life, will never die. Those who believe in Jesus, John 3:16, for God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish or die, but have eternal life. Anyone who eats from the bread of heaven, anybody who feasts on the righteousness of Jesus Christ, who believes in Jesus and his righteousness, will be saved and will never die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread, and he's not talking, this is a very metaphorical language, and I think what's confusing them is they're really thinking that Jesus is talking about a very literal language, but Jesus is really speaking in this metaphorical language of feasting on him, and it's confusing those who are just trying to get rid of Jesus. It's just confusing them. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will live forever. And this bread, which I will offer so the world may live, is my flesh. So Jesus is saying, he's not talking about us physically feasting on his flesh. He's talking about who he is, his essence, that he is the Son of God, that he is the bread sent from heaven. And so as I teach this devotional, I want to know if you really know who Jesus is. Do you really know Jesus, the bread of heaven, the only one who can truly satisfy all of our spiritual hunger, all of our spiritual thirst? And in order to do that, we need to believe in him. We need to receive him. We need to, not just with our heads, but in our hearts, believe in him. Anyone who, believes that Jesus rose from the dead, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Christ was raised from the dead, you will be saved. And you can, that is what, this is really the heart of the gospel, that Jesus is the true bread that brings salvation to people. And we need to receive him and then follow and seek after his righteousness, not righteousnesses our own, but seek after his righteousness. If you don't know him, I really encourage you to check him out. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.